The last couple of nights, PBS has been broadcasting programs on the Holocaust, and I've been watching those. And it's astounding to me, not only hearing about the suffering people experienced, but the way in which other people willingly and purposely inflicted that suffering on them. And it wasn't in the midst of a war. I mean, there was a war going on, but it wasn't because of the war. It wasn't because of any necessity or any competition for goods. It was just, it could be described as purely evil. When I watch programs or read about the Holocaust and the things people have done to other people in those situations and others, part of my mind just wants to believe that those who did that, everyone who cooperated in doing that, not just the top officials, not just Hitler and Eichmann and the others, but everybody, every Nazi, every German who stood on the street corner and said, Heil Hitler, Heil Hitler, that they're all somehow they were evil people. Their nature was that they were evil people. But the really astounding thing is that they weren't. That most of those people, and I'm not talking about the higher levels, I'm not talking about Hitler and his folk there, but just the average German and even Nazi military, camp guards and that sort of thing, they were just normal people. They weren't that different than you and me. And I know probably some who watch this video right at this point are going to be shaking your heads and already typing out a reply saying, oh yes, they were evil people. But the fact that they weren't, that they were just ordinary people, was demonstrated, especially potently, by the experiments of Stanley Milgram. If you've never heard of Stanley Milgram, you should. You should research it. You should read about his experiments, especially his Yale experiments, and what that taught psychology. He was a psychology professor at Yale, and I'm just going to give you a quick rundown. Essentially, he convinced volunteers that for the purpose of testing memory, they were to carry out these experiments in which they would shock others. And some of these people actually believed they were doing serious injury and even killing unwilling participants. People would be begging not to be shocked, and this Yale professor would tell them, no, go ahead and administer the shock. And it's astonishing. These were ordinary American people. They weren't sadistic. They weren't wanting to hurt others. A lot of them were visibly distressed and were saying, I would like to stop now. I don't want to keep shocking this person. But they would continue to do it when they were told by the authority figure, the Yale professor, to continue. They did it anyway. And it's just a demonstration of the average human's inclination to defer to authority. We want to recognize that others know more than we do. They know how things should be done. And by the way, in the Milgram experiments, no one was actually hurt. They just believed someone was being hurt. But we want to defer to authority. We want to recognize authority and do what we're told when someone has a legitimate right to tell us. And we'll even go against our conscience. We'll go against what we know is right in order to obey authority. Anyway, the reason I'm bringing this up in relation to Jehovah's Witnesses, and I want to make a footnote here, that Jehovah's Witnesses are very proud, as they should be, of the fact that they did not cooperate with Hitler. They actually chose to be in the concentration camps themselves, being starved to death and gassed to death and worked to death and all those other things, right along with the Jews and Gypsies and all the other disfavored people, rather than to be Nazis themselves. That is a valid reason to be proud, and they should be. They should be praised for that. But the reason I bring up the Nazis and the Milgram experiments in regard to Jehovah's Witnesses is because, in my experience, I believe that witnesses are more inclined to defer to authority, especially religious authority, than the average person is. For instance, if you are one of Jehovah's Witnesses, you may have a friend in your congregation, and you may be friends for 20 years. They may be your best friend. But tonight is Thursday, and I think most congregations probably still have a service meeting on Thursday. If you heard in the service meeting announcements that your friend of 20 years had been disfellowshipped, you probably would not go to your friend and ask them, why were you disfellowshipped? Did you do what you were accused of? Were you repentant? Are you really not sorry you did it? You would accept what the elders said. You would just automatically stop talking to your friend because you would defer to the authority of the elders. If the Watchtower Society, the governing body, tells you it's not okay to be immunized, as they once did, you would not be immunized. You would not take vaccinations because the society had told you not to, and they are a legitimate authority to you. Then if they changed that, which they did, you can start taking vaccinations, being immunized, because the society, a legitimate authority, told you you could. But my question is, if the society, the Watchtower, or an elder in your congregation, or someone you considered to be a legitimate authority to you, if they told you something that your conscience strongly objected to, would there be a point at which you could turn down what appeared to be a legitimate authority? Would there be a point when maybe you wouldn't be comfortable doing it, but you would feel you had to do it, where you could tell an elder or a circuit overseer, if they still exist? I heard an announcement that there are no longer circuit overseers, but I don't know if that's true. If a circuit overseer or someone at Bethel or whoever told you you had to do something that your conscience objected to, would you be capable, would you be willing to turn them down? To say, no, I'm sorry, you can disfellowship me if you feel that's necessary, but I will not do what you're telling me to do. Is there a point at which, if there were a battle between the authority of the religion and your conscience would ever win?